Next up on the In the Money Players podcast and the In the Money Media YouTube channel, we continue with our coverage of Triple Crown 2026. It's been a little quiet lately, but business about to heat up this weekend. We've got the Lecomte Stakes. It's going to be contests from our friends over at TwinSpires.com. Make sure you go to their website, navigate over to the tournaments page, and take a look at everything they've got cooking. We'll give some details on that a little bit later, but good card at Fairgrounds on this Saturday. And the Lecomte Stakes, actually a pretty interesting one. Some real historical significance here in the fairly recent history. We've had a couple of classic winners win this race, horses that went on to win the Preakness like Oxbow and War of Will. And then I hate to pick at an old wound, JK, I think you were on this one too. Actually, Mandaloon eventually awarded the Derby in a lawyer's office months after the fact. He competed in this race just a few years ago. So maybe, just maybe, there's a chance we can see some major Triple Crown race implications in this year's Lecomte at Fairgrounds on this Saturday card. How do you evaluate this field overall before we drill down into the specifics?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at these fields, a lot of times there's a couple of horses in here that you think can win the Kentucky Derby, and there's a bunch of horses in here that you think are probably just making a little bit of noise on the Triple Crown Trail. This actually feels like the type of race where some big contenders could come out of here. Some really good pedigrees, some great trainers, some horses that have made some noise going distances that are probably a little bit shorter than they want. This actually feels like a very progressive group that's going to appreciate some added ground in the coming races. Especially, remember, one of the things that's great about the Fairgrounds Triple Crown preps is that it culminates with the Louisiana Derby being run at 1 mile and 3/16.
Yeah.
So whoever passes that test, you don't really have to worry about them passing the test of 1.25 miles the first Saturday in May.
That's a great reason to have a little extra scrutiny on this round of preps. And I like the way you're framing that, because if you just looked at the speed figures these horses have been running, they ain't fast enough yet. But I mean, are they really supposed to be? It's still January. I think your point about being progressive, meaning room for improvement, is key. My main observation about this field is just how competitive it is. You can even see it in the morning line prices. The Brits have a phrase, we don't use it here, but I think we should sometimes. They talk about in a betting market, when the favorite is a bigger price, they'll say, it's 4-1 the field, meaning like 4-1 is the shortest price. That's how this morning line is shaking out. Do you think that's right? Do you think this is going to be really competitive from a betting point of view, or do you think by the time we get near post time, this market might separate itself a little bit?
No, I mean, look, there's always going to be some buzzy type of horse, right? Who's been working really well, or the trainer said it's the best horse they've had since so and so, and that can come up from time to time and can kind of lead to some steam. But based on what you see on paper, you got a couple of horses for Brad Cox, a couple for Cherie DeVaux. There's some horses with some quick numbers. There's some makers. There's some Asmusens. I think when you have a field that's spread out like that, a lot of horses trying things, or you still don't know exactly who they are. I think it does lead to a group that struggles to identify who's the most likely winner.
The local prep for this race was the Gununner. Prep, well, I should really say it's not really the local prep for this race so much as it was the first race in the series, which continues with the Lecomte, was the Gununner. And the two horses that are the top two on the morning line come out of that one. It was won by Chip Honcho, and we can take a look at, if you're watching on the YouTube side of things, we can take a look at the video of that race. This race contested on the lead. Chip Honcho was just off it there, ultimately prevailing by 3/4 of a length. Crown the Buckeye, who made the pace in there and had a clear lead in the stretch briefly before just going back to third, beaten less than a length, with Liberty National splitting them. These two horses are, once again, you would think, be up there tangling on the front end, maybe setting this one up for something to come from off the pace. How seriously do you take these two coming out of the Gununner?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the pace is going to probably be pretty quick here. These races typically are not always, but typically these races can end up with pretty good paces. You see it often because you have so many younger horses that have all this early speed, and they really only know one way of going at this point. No one can really communicate to them well enough that they're going a little bit further this time, and they should save something for the stretch. So I do feel like they should be quick enough here, especially with that run into the first turn. Chip Honcho makes a lot of sense. You're going to find a theme here as we talk through these horses for me, which is going to end up, helping me find my top pick here, is that, I thought it was a little bit interesting that after Jose won on Chip Honcho in that maiden special weight, made a different decision in the Gununner, right? Unfortunately, Mesquite scratched, but Jose was named to ride uh, that one. So I think that's a little bit interesting when you're trying to follow these jockeys around.
Yeah, it's a tricky game, but it's well worth paying attention to, and you can pick up an angle from time to time. We'll get to our official selections here at the end of the segment slash video. Another one I wanted to ask you about could be part of this early pace mix along with those two is White Tiger, one of the Brad Cox runners. This is where Irad Ortiz ends up, ran a little bit inefficiently in that maiden win, red fractions early on Timeform US, still held on. This is a son of Constitution. Is he a serious contender in this race or more of a pace factor? You think Urad can maybe get him to relax and try to attack those speeds, or is he going to make this thing a party?
Yeah, I think he's going to take some money too, and I'm not crazy about him. I think if you look at some of the races he comes out of, not the most productive, those couple of races, and not ones that he didn't really jump off the page from a figure standpoint in his own right. He's going to have some other horses he's going to have to deal with. Um, no, he is not one in which I think deserves to be at the top of the market, and I think he will take quite a bit of money. One of the things about all these horses, though, is that we don't know. That's what makes the Triple Crown and the Kentucky Derby so much fun is we don't know. We're learning basically around every turn. We're learning more about them. The first time they run a mile and an eighth, when they run a mile and an eighth, it's going to be most of them, unless they ran in the Rimson, it's going to be the first time they run a mile and an eighth. Obviously, in the Kentucky Derby, going the mile and a quarter at 20 horse field. There's all these unknowns. White Tigers goes in that category of like, I know he's won twice, but do we really know who he is?
Let's talk about his stablemate as one who could potentially get the run of the race. Number 6, Thunderbuck, I thought was worth calling out in here. You talked about the pedigree angles. This one by Gununner. I mentioned Oxbow before. He's actually the dam sire of Thunderbuck. What I like about this one of the angles, if there was a bingo card for our In the Money shows, we talk about liking horses that were closing into blue Timeform US fractions. In other words, running into a slow pace against the grain of things. Now, with many runners in here, including his stablemate, to ensure a fast pace, maybe he could be seen to good effect. What about Thunderbuck as a contender in this spot, again, for the hot Brad Cox part?
Yeah, of the Brad Cox runners, he is the one that I prefer. The one that I think makes the most sense. He's got that race, like you mentioned, closing into blue fractions. He's got a couple of different ways of going, all right, about him. If he's trained by Brad Cox, got to have at least some speed. Just in that last race, he showed that he can rate off of fractions that aren't that quick. He should have pace to close into in here. Of the Brad Cox runners, this is the one that I prefer.
I'm also interested in another closer who could get the run of the race in here, and I think this is one on your radar as well. Number 5, Golden Tempo. This horse ran what you would think from the pedigree, being curling out of the Bernardini mare Carumba, who folks may remember as a graded stakes horse from just a few years ago. You wouldn't think 6 furlongs would be what this one wanted to do. She was able to win. He was able to win anyway without the benefit of a setup. Now getting more ground. We've seen Cherie DeVoe and the wonderful work she does. Her horses tend to improve better than average second out. Golden Tempo, certainly an interesting runner in here. Can he win?
I hope so. That's going to be my top pick. We talk about different angles in racing and how you can't look at every race with the same kind of, every time I see this, I blindly bet it.
Right.
And I think that the musical jockeys game, musical chairs of jockeys game is a very dangerous game to play. As you know, Pete, knowing agents and knowing some of the behind the scenes stories that go with why one ended up here and didn't end up there. And it looks on paper as if, Irad picked that one, but really there's a whole lot more behind the scenes that led to that. I do feel like Jose picked this one. And like I said, I do believe that it is a game that you want to tread lightly with, but Jose's been, he was on the horse to the outside for Asmussen, Honcho. He was on the other runner for Cherie, whose name is escaping me, but I'm going to find it here in 4 seconds, Mesquite. And it just feels like he must have loved what he felt in that sprint race with this horse, who is obviously bred to go longer, and I think will appreciate a little bit more ground. You talk about Cherie. I love to see these trainers start to get some, not that Cherie didn't have big owners anyways, but to get to grow, to get other owners. Now to have horses for Phipps and St. Elias says a lot about the progression of her career and where I think she's headed. And I do think that this could be a serious horse. And I'm going to follow Jose Ortiz here with this one.
What of Mesquite? Is this one you'd have in your exotic mix? This horse has gone long, has gone a mile and a 16th, did have a setup, was odds on, and really just barely scraped home the last day. But I'm not ruling the horse out as like a deeper backup type.
No, there's nothing wrong with picking up Flavian Pratt either in the equation, right? You lose Jose, you pick up Flavian. The one thing I'll say about Mesquite is that obviously I'd kind of fallen in love with this narrative already about Jose picking this horse. So there's nothing I can really do about that at this point. I'm kind of married to it. But the one thing I will say though about Mesquite, if I'm looking for a way to feel better about my selection, is that I don't love horses that are deep closers in these types of spots. Everything has to go their way. Now, they're young, they're progressive. Maybe Mesquite was a deep closer on the day, but now there's been some work done to put a little bit more speed into Mesquite. Maybe Flavian, being an aggressive rider, will put Mesquite a little bit more into the race. That's why I do think this one would be my second choice in here. I think Cherie's got this race wrapped up.
Looking for the Cherie exact. I got to ask you about Stop the Car. This one, a two-time winner. Brendan Walsh, a trainer. You could take it out of your wallet and show us the card because you're a card-carrying member of the fan club. Do you think this horse might be ready for his close-up?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't have a problem. The one thing I will say about Stop the Car is, look, the horse did run for a tag first time. Now, listen, that's a $150,000 tag, so does that really count? But still, it was a little bit cold that day on the board. Won, came back into an allowance race. It was still cold on the board and won. That just makes me wonder how good those two races were that Stop the Car won. But, I'm always rooting for my man Snapper.
Will be tested for class, but it's an interesting version of the Lecomte. We've got the $600 Lecomte KDBC qualifier happening over at TwinSpires.com. KDBC, the new major, very successful first year, and they're ripping it up. I don't know if you've noticed, but this platform continues to improve. The participation in January, in the first week of January 26th, they had as much action, as many players participating as they did in all of January last year. If you haven't gotten involved, get involved. TwinSpires.com/tournaments, the place to go for that. Also, if you want more Kentucky Derby content, make sure you check out the Kentucky Derby, the content that we have at In the Money Media YouTube channel, In the Money Players Podcast, wherever you get your pods. For JK, I'm PTF. May you win all your photos.